The Great Depression was more than a simple panic recession. Sparked by a culture of overconsumption and encouraged by laissez-faire economics, the middle class turned to margin buying. As a result, the stock market crashed in 1929. However, during that time, most Americans were unaware of the severity of the recession, believing that it was just part of the regular boom and bust of economic cycles. The reality was that the nation had entered the Great Depression as industrial production, construction, and crop prices all fell, with unemployment reaching an all-time high. Aggravating the situation, the wealthy tended to save money that might have been put back into the economy if it were spread among the middle and lower classes. Therefore, it required extraordinary measures in the form of government intervention. President Herbert Hoover's strategy of depending on the invisible hand to correct the economy was no longer a feasible nor practical option. After all, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. With the election of President Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1932, the Works Progress Administration would change the nature of the welfare state forever.
The Emergency Relief Appropriation Act, passed by Congress on April 8, 1935, gave President Franklin Delano Roosevelt the authority to pass Executive Order 7034, which established the Works Progress Administration along with the other New Deal relief programs. Created to alleviate the poverty brought on by the Great Depression, the main goal of the WPA was to provide financial assistance in the form of paid jobs for families without an employed breadwinner. The purpose of the WPA was not full-time employment. The WPA was established with the goal of enacting smaller, community-specific projects that involved unskilled workers, thus mobilizing people faster than the larger projects of the older Public Works Administration. To foster economic growth and prevent public dependence on the dole, Roosevelt and his advisors decided to provide jobs for repairing and building public infrastructure. Overall, the WPA helped to decrease the unemployment rate for around 10%. By 1936, over 3.4 million people were working on WPA projects. Not only did the WPA provide necessary employment to struggling civilians, but the jobs they provided helped to improve society and living conditions. Furthermore, throughout its course of 8 years, 25% of all families in the U.S. depend on wages earned from WPA workers for survival. Furthermore, in 1935, at the outset of the program, 10,610,000 people in the U.S. were unemployed, translating to about 20% of the population. But in 1941, before World War II started, only 5,560,000 Americans were unemployed, accounting for about 10% of the population. The projects workers employed by the WPA were sometimes referred to as boondoggles, a term that was coined by people who considered the WPA infrastructure programs to be useless. However, workers built more than 5,900 schools, 226 hospitals, 12,800 playgrounds, and more. In addition, they constructed sewers, storm lines, and roads, many of which still exist and are still in use today, negating their uselessness. These workers also built electrical facilities in rural regions, improving the lifestyles of farmers. Moreover, they replanted forests through the Great Plains Shelter Belt and cleaned up poor neighborhood slums. WPA infrastructure was used extensively by the defense industries through airports and roads, which transported soldiers efficiently. During the Roosevelt recession of 1937, FDR hastily concluded that the Depression was alleviating. Thus, the WPA received less funding, resulting in a great dip in employment rates, unveiling the central role that the WPA has played in employing the country.
While only 13.5% of the workers employed by the WPA were women in 1938, the program ultimately achieved its goals of reducing unemployment rates and providing jobs to support families. Although discriminatory, the WPA limited jobs mainly to men, perceived as the breadwinners of the household, to prevent both husbands and wives from working at the same time. This ensured that wives would not take away jobs from breadwinners of other households, thus maximizing the number of families that could benefit from the WPA wages to 25% of all families in the U.S. Moreover, the Women's Program Director, Ellen Woodward, successfully pushed for women to work in more professional jobs and acquired equal treatment for both genders. The WPA hired African Americans and employed them to renovate and build housing projects, hospitals, schools, playgrounds, parks, and swimming pools in black communities. The WPA employed both white and black doctors at clinics to provide free medical and dental care for poor black adults and children, decreased the illiteracy rate by 5% by teaching 250,000 African Americans to read and write, and more than 5,000 African American supervisors and instructors worked on educational programs of the WPA. In northern cities, the WPA gave qualified blacks their first chance in white-collar positions, and the program also supported the black culture by funding the Negro Theater Project. Furthermore, President Roosevelt and the WPA directors Harry Hopkins and Aubrey Williams gave orders against discrimination, quote-unquote, on any grounds whatsoever, such as race, religion, or political affiliation. Although 75% of blacks in the WPA were unskilled workers, and only 0.5% of African Americans received higher positions, The purpose of the WPA was to lower unemployment rates by providing unskilled laborers with work, and not necessarily to combat discrimination. Such a motive could result in the program being too progressive and consequently not being passed through Congress. One of the major construction projects was the building of Bonneville Dam. The Army Corps of Engineers had recommended such construction of 10 dams along the Columbia River to stimulate the economy in this rural region in 1929. But no action was taken by any private businesses until the New Deal with the WPA. While the construction of the dam provoked much distress among Native Americans, caused villages to be flooded, and obstructed the migration of salmon, the benefits to the community it provided as a whole outweighs this, as the construction of it provided 3,000 workers with jobs, and even to today, it is a source of cheap hydroelectric power to the Pacific Northwest. Although this dam competed with private industries, no private business had taken any initiative in the 5 years after the Army Corps declared the need of these dams, and thus the government had simply taken the opportunity to employ thousands of workers and to provide electricity that improved the daily lives of dwellers by the Columbia River.
The million of struggling individuals employed by WPA were paid through taxes and bonds. Paying taxes to government to help build infrastructure improved societal conditions for everybody, because funding the WPA worker allowed for more affluent people to support an effort that eventually paid off tremendously through its cultural legacy and infrastructure. Furthermore, funding the WPA encouraged people to participate in the consumer culture that was greatly disrupted by the Great Depression. During the Great Depression, FDR reintroduced excise taxes to increase federal income, which had dropped because of the lower income tax collection. The healthy excise tax on alcoholic beverages paid about 1/3 of all federal taxes during the Great Depression. However, alcohol was not a necessity, so those who choose to buy alcohol choose to pay the excise tax. The federal government was not hurting Americans by increasing excise taxes because the money went into providing relief programs for the poor and unemployed.
Although some WPA officials threatened to fire workers if they did not support Democratic candidates for office, this does not negate the fact that the WPA still served its primary purpose of employing Americans to alleviate their distress. As Nick Taylor, author of American Made, the enduring legacy of the WPA when FDR put the nation to work, said, "If you're employing millions of people on hundreds of thousands of projects, you're going to make mistakes." The WPA strove to preserve a capitalist society by purposely avoiding projects that would compete with private firms. In fact, the WPA stimulated businesses in the automobile industry by constructing roads and highways. While the WPA did nationalize some industries like the Bonneville Dam, its purpose was to restore the capitalist economy to what it was before, by building infrastructure that promoted other industries and in the process providing needed services like electricity to rural regions.
The WPA helped to produce many symphonies and plays elevating American culture. The Federal Art Project provided jobs to artists who decorated a multitude of public buildings such as schools and post offices with sculpture, canvases, paintings, and murals. The WPA Federal Theater Project invented new modes of performance and finance plays all over the country. Also, musicians were paid to organize community singing and symphony orchestras, raising the morale of Americans. Thus, the WPA created a strong American culture in the 1930s, with much of their artwork still exists today, created by 10,000 commissioned artists. The WPA and Federal Art Project both employed hundreds of artists to print over 2 million posters from 1935 to 1943, and these artists made 35,000 designs to promote interest in the public for education, nature, safety, and travel. Many posters promoted national parks, thus encouraging conservation and appreciation of the environment. As the economy revived due to defense industry production, Congress officially abolished the WPA along with other programs in 1943. Although the WPA did not directly end the Great Depression, it lessened the severity, and its legacy is still beneficial to American lives today. The WPA constructed 651,087 miles of roads, streets, and highways, built, repaired, and refurbished 124,031 bridges, 125,110 public buildings, 8,192 parks, and 853 landing fields, cleaning slums, reviving forests, and extending electrical power to rural locations. The WPA built facilities in practically every community in the country. Most are still providing service half a century later. It is time we recognize this legacy.